Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Ankle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And finally, I am talking about the new album from Frontline Assembly called Wake Up the Coma. Frontline Assembly, the Canadian outfit currently consisting of Bill Leeb, Reese Fulber, and a whole bunch of others over the years, such as Chris Peterson, Michael Balch, Jeremy Inkle, Jared Slingerland, Jason Bazinet, etc. Sorry for butchered pronunciations, as per usual. Bill Leeb is the only consistent member. They've been around for a long time, since the mid-late 80s, and they've just been cranking out album after album every couple of years, with this most recent one here being number 18 by my count. And they're one of the most prominent names in the world of industrial music and EBM. Now, as for my personal background with these guys, I am gonna be an outsider perspective. I'd known about them for years, think they got recommended to me through iTunes once a long time ago, but I hadn't actually heard a single track of theirs until preparing for this video. Hell, industrial music in general is a pretty big blind spot for me when it comes to my experience in electronic music. The only industrial band I have any background with is Cabaret Voltaire. I've been a fan of them for a while. And I suppose if you count Depeche Mode, they're pretty close to EBM and have prominent industrial elements. But even them I only properly got into like 2 years ago when I reviewed their last album. Maybe there's also Meatbeat Manifesto. I think they're a notable enough name in industrial music that I'm familiar with, I think. I don't know. And I previewed a couple of Throbbing Gristle tracks when I was doing my Chris Carter video pretty recently, though I don't think that actually counts, because I didn't actually properly listen to any of their albums. Just kind of previewed through some of them. Needless to say, I am far from an expert on the genre, but that's also specifically why I wanted to cover this album. I'm sure people are familiar with my format by now, that I have this segment where I go down an artist's entire discography so far, and this was going to be a really freaking big one. I spent months on this in brief segment. It's going to be very not brief, as you'd expect. If you just want to get my thoughts on the new album itself, I suppose you can skip to this time code if you want, but, you know, first-timer marathoning back catalogs of cult favorite legends has become a part of this channel. So, without any further ado, how about I go down their studio album discography so far? Okay, I was expecting this to be pretty out of my element, but turns out already being a Cabaret Voltaire fan meant I could get into this no problem. Sounds like something they'd do in the crackdown microphonies era. Dark-sounding 80s grooves with clanking metal and rough voice samples. I enjoyed it a fair bit. More of the same, maybe more focus on the abstract and weird side, I guess. Good stuff here, too. It's starting to pick up on a bit of a formula here. This is basically the exact same as the last two albums. This is still mostly more of the same, but I'll admit by this point they're not just Cabaret Voltaire ripoffs. They're doing weirder stuff with straight 80s sounds than the Cabs themselves did in the 80s. Maybe it's because all these albums were released in the span of like 3 years, but FLA had more material with more interesting things to do. I am having a hard time taking Bill Leeb's voice seriously on this particular one. He sounds pretty ridiculous here, but still overall not bad. Okay, while instrumentally pretty much exactly the same as what came before, it's a lot faster and more aggressive and more chaotic. And also noticeably better, I think. Bill Leeb doesn't sound nearly as ridiculous to me as he did on the last one, either. Maybe not the kind of thing I'd expect to get into, but yeah, this was pretty fun. Okay, this is the one I was told is the big one. The popular pick for best album of theirs and the one I should pay attention to. It is in fact probably my favorite up to this point. They're kinda including elements of IDM and using it to pump up their usual abrasive and epic sound, and as usual I had a fun time. Also, I think this is the first one that doesn't really sound attached to its time. Maybe I got some Underworld vibes in parts, but that's about it. I'll hang on to this one. Okay, this one brought in a ton of crunching metal guitars all over the place, and there's even a rapper on the track Victim of a Criminal. Good to see they're evolving and trying new things, but probably not gonna listen to this again. This is the other big one, apparently, and it's basically a mix of the last two albums. Pretty good. The sound design is really impressive. I like its use of all the samples from movies, but You know, it didn't sound that out of the box for them, didn't really blow me away. I guess the track Immortal stuck out to me for being a weird but epic instrumental that bizarrely ended in a sample of the THX logo sound, which, okay. May keep this one for more repeat listens as well, since it is such a big fan favorite, but kind of ambivalent on my first listen. This one apparently got some criticism for being a big change of pace involving a lot of breakbeat and drum and bass and IDM elements. I'm not sure why this was such a big deal. They're following the same fundamental formulas as always, just with different ingredients, but as it turns out, this change of pace led to this being one of my biggest favorites from them, so yeah, hoping for more like this. And I got more, though they brought back the metal guitars in some parts, and those still don't sound that great. But all the old 90s IDM and house synth tones make this a lot more fun to listen for me. There's even some movie soundtrack-ish orchestral samples and parts as well. Very nice addition. As were the really obvious FSOL samples, those were cool. This is basically the previous album again, but with more atmospheric and ambient-centric, I think. Enjoyed this one quite a bit as well. I've seen a lot of comparisons between this one and the long-running FLA side project Delirium. I've heard that stuff may be more up my alley than the regular FLA stuff, so I may check that one out later. This one keeps switching up between rough and aggressive like the old days and really ambient-centric with like choirs and other vocal soloists. Bill Ebe saying "let's all come together, let's all join hands" is pretty strange to me, and the title track had some moments that weirdly sounded like Linkin Park. But I still enjoy this mellow, ambient-centric direction the last couple of albums have taken, and the overwhelming 90s-ness of it. Even though this is from 2004, it's still 90s to me. And now we've returned to the hard-hitting, metal-tinged sound of the Hardwired days. It's okay. It's not as good as Hardwired. And whoever was doing that bizarre pirate voice on the track Future Fail, please stop. Now this one appears to be more of a straight metal album for the most part. Still got plenty of electronics, as yeah, I'd hope, but it's more of like a full band project with a lot more metal than electronic. It's certainly better sounding than Millennium. I thought it was really good for what it was, and if you're a big metal fan, you'll probably love this. Though, as someone who's not really a metal guy, really only the two most toned down tracks, Afterlife and Downfall, left a strong impact on me. Those two were pretty dang good, though. This is a video game soundtrack they worked on, not their most on-brand material ever, to say the least, but it's pretty dang good for what it is, and still recognizable as their work. Simultaneously hard-hitting and atmospheric, with a lot of modern dubstep elements worked in pretty well. Yeah, I think this one's a keeper. And now they worked those dubstep elements into a regular mainline album. Not the most interesting thing they've ever made, but they are able to use the more modern electronic production styles to their advantage and make an on-brand and fun listen out of it. So yeah, this was solid. And finally, the sequel to Air Mech. Gave this one a try since I remember it being featured on iTunes last year. Also, it's the last album to feature Jeremy Inkle's contributions after his unfortunate passing in the beginning of 2018. Unfortunately, didn't find this one quite as strong or as interesting as Air Mech. It's fine for what it is, but I'd recommend that one more. Which finally brings us to here. So I can definitively say that I'm glad to have gone through this catalog. And I can definitely see myself coming back to some of their stuff. There are admittedly a lot of albums of theirs that try to accomplish similar purposes, and I'm not keeping all of them. I don't know how much I'd recommend sitting through every single album of theirs like I did, but I definitely found a good handful of keepers from them. Also, Bill Ebe's presence as a frontman is really not much of a selling point for me. He doesn't ruin any albums he sings over. I can pretty much always at least tolerate him, but his voice will never be the reason I re-listen to any of these albums. Like, at best, he sounds like a mix of Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode and Stephen Malander from Cabaret Voltaire. At worst, he sounds kinda ridiculous with all his guttural grunting. Probably not a turn-off if you are a big industrial or metal guy, but he's just an okay frontman to me, and that's all I can say. Also, Reese Fulber turned out to not be a key force in whether I liked any given FLA album or not. There were plenty of albums I liked with him on board, but there were just as many I liked without him. He's a neutral addition to me. But I figure a lot of fans will get excited at his being on this new one. So now, at long last, let's talk about this new 2019 album, Wake Up the Coma. I didn't really know what to expect with this one, so I just jumped in, and how does it fare? It appears to basically be a more interesting take on the kinds of sounds from their last regular album, Echogenetic. Primarily sticking to old school FLA formulas of EBM and industrial music, but with a much more modern sounding production style. No dubstep here this time, but once again they are taking their old EBM sound from the early 90s and presenting it with some synth tones you might hear on a more modern EDM-ish kind of album. Maybe a bit poppier as well, if not by a huge amount. It's all very well produced, and it sounds like Frontline Assembly. That said, it's being more interesting doesn't necessarily mean it's interesting in a good way. There were two really bizarre moments on this album that stuck out to me like a sore thumb and have to be addressed right out the gate. The first one is one that'll stick out to you if you just look over the track listing before actually listening to it. The third track on here is a cover of Me Amadeus, featuring Jimmy Urine from the band Mindless Self-Indulgence, doing a pretty on-point Falco impression. It's not a bad cover, it sounds good and accomplishes the kind of epic sound that FLA are known for, though it is comically out of place on here. Not to mention it comes off to me as a pretty redundant cover. Like, aside from sounding bigger and more modern, it's basically the same as the original. I'm sure they had fun making it, but I don't know if its addition was necessarily a net positive on the album as a whole. It makes it harder for me to take this thing seriously. And speaking of not being able to take this album seriously, the other really bizarre moment on this album I gotta talk about is the track Living a Lie. This one at first seemed pretty cool, kind of a move into some poppier territory, going for a really fast-paced and energetic vibe, even with some stutter edits on the vocals, which were pretty cool. But then Believe comes out to proclaim, "I'm making love to an alien." So that completely threw me off much in the same way Heart On by Cell Dweller did, though it's less eye-roll inducing and much more just astonishing. Like the kind of thing that will never fail to make me do a double take and wonder, what the fuck are you doing, Bill Lieb? And he keeps running with it too. It's a part of the chorus, and Lieb keeps talking about fucking aliens, and it completely throws off the tone, not just of this song, but of the whole album for me. Like, this has to be a joke song. It has to be, but you wouldn't guess from the title Living a Lie that it would be like that. It just came right the fuck out of nowhere. But besides those two, and the lyrics don't actually stick out to me in any way. Like, it's kinda just standard FLA fare. Talking about the end of the world and government surveillance and other, edgy stuff. I mean, I guess you could theoretically make the connection that something like Tilt could be connected to the current times we live in. Like, this is the end, we're all dying is a sentiment that's pretty commonly felt in the last couple of years. But it doesn't actually feel like commentary on the overall apocalyptic mood of the world right now. Because it's not like Orbital saying the end is nigh or the Chemical Brothers saying we're on the eve of destruction, which kinda lets me know that they know what's going on. A line like "this is the end, we're all dying" coming out of Bill Lieb doesn't actually mean anything to me. It just kinda sounds like he's doing his usual edgy shtick that he does on every FLA album. So basically what I'm saying is that the lyrics probably don't matter to this album. The more I read into them, the less enjoyment I get out of this thing. It becomes less apocalyptic and more just kinda silly. Hateful is another good example of being better if I don't actually think about what Lieb is saying. Him feeling the love and the hate over and over. Whatever, I don't actually care. So it probably sounds at this point that I hated this album or something, but that's actually not the case at all. I've pretty much brought up all the criticisms I have of this thing. For the most part, I actually did have a fair bit of fun with it. Even the corny moments on here aren't that bad. Living a Lie may probably be my least favorite track because of the alien fucking is really fucking distracting. But the instrumental on that one is still really good, and the Me Amadeus cover, I mean, if you take it out of context, it's perfectly fine. The album doesn't have to be deep to still be enjoyable, and I do otherwise think it's good for what it is. I imagine fans of the band will have absolutely no problem getting into this. And that does mainly come down to the production, which, as I said, is across the board really solid and well balanced. Every track on here sounds really epic and hard-hitting as you'd want out of FLA, and makes very good use of its modern electronic production. All these elements are given enough space to breathe, it all sounds really good. I just think it can be a bit of a mixed bag. Like, there are other kind of forgettable moments on here too that I didn't already mention, like the opener Eye on You, it's cool, and the guest singer Robert Gurl, or however you say that, he's alright, but he didn't leave that strong an impression on me. But the remaining 2 tracks on here with guest features popped out to me way more. The title track on here featuring Nick Holmes was probably the best track in the bunch. His clean vocals brought the track a much more melodic and pop rock kind of focus to it and made it a lot catchier and more fun to listen to. And Spitting Wind featuring Chris Connolly was a solid closer of maybe a bit of an arbitrary one. Connolly had a bit of a David Bowie-ish tone to his voice in many parts. He was an enjoyable presence as well. In general, I think this album actually did pick up a fair bit in the back half. Other tracks like Mesmerized and Structures kept sticking out to me as fun highlights, but the beginning had other good moments too. Like, I kinda wish the opener was the second track, Arbeit. That track was really fast-paced, catchy, and fun, but I don't know, that's about all I have to say about this album. There was a lot of stuff I liked, but the stuff I didn't like on here just gave me a lot more to say than the stuff I did like. I guess at the end of the day, whether I recommend this album to people depends on whether you're already a fan of the band and their style to begin with. If you're already an FLA fan, absolutely pick this up. You'll have a really well-produced and epic-sounding journey that may have a couple of corny moments, but you'll be able to deal with it just fine. I mean, people told me they thought Cell Dweller's Hard On was enjoyable and it's ridiculous, and I can see people saying the same about Lieb's alien fucking, and will probably appreciate the nostalgia trip provided by the Amadeus cover. But if you've never tried any FLA albums before, I'm not sure this is the best place to start. I mean, I think Technical Neural Implant should probably be the first album you hear from these guys, but, you know, then again, I don't know how useful my newcomer perspective would be when it comes to that. I guess at the end of the day, I think Wake Up the Coma is fine. It's got its moments that stuck out to me, both in good and not as good ways, and I'm probably not going to be hanging on to it, but I definitely see its appeal. I got a decent amount of enjoyment out of it. This was a pretty fun video to make, even if it took freaking forever. On Wake Up the Coma, I'm overall feeling, I'm going to go with a 6.7 out of 10. It's pretty alright. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me a review something, link to my Patreon, it's in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.